The poolside cafe thrummed with life under the August sun of 2025, its concrete patio radiating heat as the scent of chlorine and sunscreen hung heavy in the air. Lila, a 20-year-old waitress with a lean frame and sun-warmed skin, darted between tables, her short uniform skirt brushing her thighs with each step. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, strands escaping to frame her face, and her grin carried a playful edge as she balanced a tray of iced drinks. The chatter of patrons, families, couples, lone swimmers, blended with the splash of water from the nearby pool, a steady pulse of summer noise in the urban sprawl. Among the regulars sat Ray, a 50-year-old contractor with silver threading through his dark hair, his rugged build still firm from decades of hard work. He lounged at a table near the edge, his damp swim trunks clinging to his legs, a towel slung over one broad shoulder. Their interactions had always been routine, a nod, a polite thanks as she refilled his glass, until that afternoon shifted the air between them. Ray rose, fresh from a swim, water beating on his chest as he brushed past her on his way to the bathroom. His wet hand grazed her bare arm, a fleeting touch that jolted through her, sharp and unexpected. She froze mid-step, her tray tilting slightly, her eyes darting to the expanse of his torso before he disappeared around the corner. The moment lingered, a spark igniting beneath her skin as she resumed her rounds, the clink of ice against glass suddenly louder in her ears. Ray returned moments later, settling back into his seat, his gray eyes catching hers as she approached with a pitcher of iced tea. Her fingers brushed his knuckles as she poured, the cool condensation slick against the heat of her hand, and she let the contact linger. A quiet test. His gaze lifted, steady and searching, and a slow smile curved his lips. "Careful, kid. You're stirring something you might not handle," he said, his voice low, roughened by years, threading through the hum of the cafe like a secret. Lila's stomach tightened, a restless heat pooling as his words settled in her. She stepped back, adjusting her apron, her thighs brushing together as she fought the urge to glance at his hands, strong, weathered, capable of more than lifting a glass. Ray leaned back, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp, tracing the sway of her hips as she moved away. The age gap loomed between them, a silent edge that sharpened the pull he felt. Her youth, her energy, a contrast to his seasoned calm. The patio buzzed on, oblivious, but their exchange had carved a new space, each look a step toward something uncharted. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the tables, the pool's surface glinting like liquid gold. Lila wiped a damp cloth over a vacated spot, her thoughts drifting to Ray's touch, the way it had lingered in her mind. He watched her from his seat, sipping his tea, the ice clinking as he shifted, his own thoughts tangling with the image of her, lithe, bold, a challenge wrapped in a uniform. The cafe's rhythm carried on, orders called, laughter rising, but beneath it, a current hummed, their awareness of each other growing with every stolen glance, every brush of possibility. The poolside cafe pulsed with late afternoon energy, the sun sinking toward the horizon, painting the concrete in hues of amber and rose. Lila navigated the crowded patio, her tray balanced with practiced ease, the clatter of plates and glasses, a steady hum beneath the laughter of swimmers drying off by the water's edge. The air carried the tang of chlorine and the faint sweetness of spilled lemonade, clinging to her skin as she approached Ray's table. His silver hair caught the light, his frame relaxed but alert, and she felt his gaze before she met it, a quiet weight that quickened her steps. She leaned in to clear his empty glass, her fingers brushing his as she stacked it on her tray. The cool edge of the tumbler, a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. His eyes flicked up, holding hers, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a slow, knowing curve. "You're pushing it, aren't you?" he said, his voice a low rasp that cut through the cafe's din, settling deep in her chest. Lila straightened, her lips parting as a flush crept up her neck. her thoughts tangling with the image of his hands, rough, steady, on more than just a glass. She turned away, her ponytail swinging, but the heat of his words stayed with her, a restless pull she couldn't ignore. The moment shifted when Sam, her 22-year-old coworker, sauntered over. His apron slung low on his hips, dark curls damp with sweat. He'd caught her distraction, his grin sharp as he leaned against a nearby table, wiping his hands on a rag. "Got your eye on the silver fox by the pool?" he teased, loud enough for Ray to hear, his tone playful but edged with curiosity. Lila's cheeks burned, her pulse a sudden thud in her ears, and she shot back, "Maybe I do! What's that to you?" The words slipped out, bold and unfiltered, hanging in the air as Sam laughed, oblivious to the shift they'd triggered. Ray's jaw tightened, his fingers pausing on his glass, but his gaze darkened, locking onto hers with a new intensity. The patio's noise faded to a dull roar as Sam wandered off, leaving Lila to face the aftermath. She busied herself at the drink station, the hiss of the soda fountain sharp against her scattered thoughts, when Ray appeared beside her. He leaned close, his shadow falling over the counter, the scent of pool water and sun-warmed skin rolling off him. "If you meant that, meet me in the bathroom in 5, he said, his voice a gravelly thread that wove through the hum of the cafe, laced with a risk that made her breath catch. He stepped back, his eyes steady, then turned, disappearing into the crowd as the weight of his invitation settled over her. Lila gripped the counter, the cool metal grounding her as her mind raced. The cafe buzzed on, kids splashing, a blender whirring, but her focus narrowed to the clock above the bar, its second hand ticking with relentless calm. Her fingers tightened on her apron, the fabric rough against her palms, as she weighed the choice: retreat to the safety of her routine, or step toward the unknown. Ray's presence lingered, a phantom touch on her arm, and the thrill of his dare pulsed through her, sharp and undeniable. She glanced at his empty table, the chair still angled from his departure, and the decision crystallized, her feet itching to move. The sun dipped lower, the pool's surface a mirror of fading light, and Lila slipped away from the station, her heart a steady drumbeat as she wove through the thinning crowd. The bathroom door loomed ahead, its faded blue paint chipped at the edges, a portal to something she couldn't unmake. She paused, hand hovering over the handle, the distant splash of water and a child's shout fading behind her. The city stretched beyond the cafe's bounds, alive with its own rhythm, but here, in this fleeting pocket of summer, she stood on the brink, the pull of Ray's words drawing her forward, like a tide she couldn't resist. The bathroom door clicked shut behind Lila, sealing out the cafe's fading hum as the dim light cast long shadows across the tiled floor. The air hung heavy with humidity, the faint scent of bleach mingling with the chlorine still clinging to Ray's skin. He stood by the sink, his shirt unbuttoned, revealing a dusting of silver hair across his chest, the fabric damp where it framed his broad frame. Lila's breath caught, her sneakers scuffing the tiles as she stepped closer, emboldened by the quiet that wrapped around them. Her fingers brushed the edge of his swim trunks, tracing the wet fabric with a boldness that surprised her, her voice low and teasing. "Thought you might need a hand drying off." Ray's eyes sharpened, a flash of restraint flickering before he caught her wrists, his grip firm but fleeting, then released her. The unspoken permission hung between them as she tugged at the waistband, the sound of the elastic shifting loud in the cramped space. His hands hovered, then settled on her shoulders, the warmth of his palms seeping through her uniform as she pressed closer, her body brushing his. The age gap stretched taut, a silent challenge, and the boundary between waitress and patron frayed, dissolving in the steamy air as their breaths synced, quick and uneven. The sink's edge pressed into Lila's hip as Ray leaned in, his lips finding hers in a fierce, claiming kiss, years of restraint unraveling in the heat of it. Her hands slid up his back, fingers digging into the taut muscle beneath his shirt, the taste of salt water faint on his tongue. The world narrowed to the press of their bodies, the cool tile against her calves, a stark contrast to the fire building between them. His hands roamed, one sliding to her waist, bunching the fabric of her skirt as he pulled her flush against him, the other cupping her cheek with a tenderness that clashed with the urgency of his mouth. Her pulse raced, a wild thudding that echoed in her ears, drowning out the distant splash of the pool. They moved in a tangle of need, her fingers fumbling with his shirt, pushing it wider as his chest pressed to hers, the heat of him radiating through the thin cotton of her top. Ray's breath hitched, a low sound rumbling from his throat as she explored, her touch tentative yet hungry. The bathroom's confines amplified every noise, the rustle of fabric, the soft creak of his stance shifting, each sensation heightened by the risk of their seclusion. Her skirt rode higher, the air brushing her thighs, and his hand found her hip, steadying her against the sink as their closeness deepened, a rhythm of touch and tension pulling them past the point of retreat. Outside, the cafe carried on, a blender whirring, voices rising in carefree bursts. But here, time stretched thin, the city's pulse a faint echo beyond the walls. Lila's hair slipped from its tie, strands clinging to her damp neck, and Ray brushed them aside, his fingers lingering as he studied her, youthful, bold, a mirror to his own guarded want. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting their shadows in sharp relief, and she tilted her head, meeting his gaze with a defiance that dared him to pull back. He didn't, his hand tightening on her waist, the connection forging something new in the humid haze, a shift from casual glances to a bond teetering on the edge of definition. The moment hung, fragile yet electric, as they stood locked in each other's orbit. Lila's chest rose and fell, her skin warm where it met his, and Ray's jaw clenched, a flicker of doubt swallowed by the pull of her nearness. The bathroom's stillness pressed in, the drip of a faucet marking the seconds, and they lingered there, caught between the thrill of their defiance and the weight of what it meant. The urban sprawl beyond the door churned on, cars rolling, a siren wailing faintly, but inside, they'd crossed a line, their roles reshaped by a hunger neither could deny. The bathroom's stillness clung to them, the drip of the faucet a steady pulse as Lila and Ray stood entwined, their breaths heavy in the humid air. Her chest pressed to his, the thin fabric of her uniform damp where it met his skin, and his hand lingered on her waist, fingers firm against the curve of her hip. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly, casting jagged shadows across the tiles, and Ray's jaw tightened, a fleeting tension in his frame as he pulled back just enough to search her face. Lila's dark eyes met his, bold and unguarded. Her lips parted as the heat of their kiss still lingered, a saltwater trace on her tongue. She shifted, her sneakers scuffing the floor, and leaned into him again, her hands sliding up his chest, tracing the silver-dusted hair beneath his open shirt. The texture was rough under her palms, a contrast to the softness of her own skin, and she felt his breath catch, a low rumble vibrating through him. His hands moved too, one threading through her loosened hair, the strands slipping between his fingers, the other guiding her closer, pressing her back against the sink's edge. The cool porcelain bit into her lower back, grounding her as their bodies aligned, the space between them shrinking until it was nothing but shared warmth. Ray's voice broke the quiet, rough, and hushed. "You're too much, you know that?" he said, the words a confession as much as a warning, threading through the haze of their closeness. Lila's lips curved, a faint smile that carried no retreat, and she tilted her head, her breath brushing his neck as she pressed higher on her toes. The gesture drew him in, his forehead resting against hers, their exhales mingling in the steamy air. Her fingers tightened on his shirt, tugging lightly, and he responded, his grip shifting to her thighs, lifting her with an ease that belied his years, her legs instinctively wrapping around his waist. The shift deepened their connection, the sink creaking under her weight as they moved together, a rhythm born of instinct and need. Her hands gripped his shoulders, nails pressing into the muscle there, and his breath grew ragged, a sound that echoed off the tiles. The city outside flickered at the edges of their awareness. A distant car horn, the faint splash of the pool, but it faded, irrelevant against the storm building within these walls. Sweat beaded on Ray's brow, the heat of the moment etching lines of tension across his face, and Lila's hair clung to her neck, the damp strands a testament to their shared intensity. Their closeness teetered on the edge, a dance of push and pull, each touch a dare to go further. Ray's hands steadied her, one braced against the sink, the other tracing the line of her thigh. The fabric of her skirt bunched higher. She arched into him, her body yielding yet demanding, and he groaned softly, the sound swallowed by the press of her lips to his jaw. The age gap hung between them, a silent thread that sharpened the thrill, her youth a spark, his experience a slow burn, and they leaned into it, the boundary of their roles dissolving in the humid haze. The bathroom's confines amplified every sensation, the rustle of his shirt, the creak of the sink, the faint drip marking time. Lila's pulse thrummed, a wild beat in her chest, and Ray's grip tightened, his fingers digging into her skin just enough to anchor them both. They paused, foreheads pressed together, breaths sinking in jagged bursts, the weight of their want a tangible force. The urban sprawl beyond the door churned on, voices rising, a blender whirring, but here they were suspended, caught in a moment that defied the ordinary, their connection a fire that refused to dim. The bathroom's humid air settled around them, a heavy stillness descending as Lila and Ray lingered, foreheads pressed together, their breaths slowing in the wake of their storm. Her legs remained wrapped around his waist, the sink's edge digging into her thighs, but she barely noticed. Her hands still gripping his shoulders, fingers curled into the damp fabric of his shirt. Ray's chest heaved, sweat glistening on his brow, and his hands steadied her, one braced against the sink, the other resting on her hip, warm and firm. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting their shadows in a jagged dance across the tiles, and the faint drip of the faucet marked the quiet that followed. Lila slid down slowly, her sneakers hitting the floor with a soft thud, her skirt falling back into place as she leaned against the sink for support. Ray stepped back, his shirt hanging open, the silver hair on his chest catching the dim glow. His gray eyes searched hers, a mix of intensity and something softer, uncertainty perhaps, flickering in their depths. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, her skin flushed and damp, and the weight of their moment pressed in, a silent shift that neither could unmake. The city's hum seeped through the walls, a car engine revving, a shout from the poolside, but it felt distant, a world apart from the space they'd carved out. He spoke first, his voice rough but low. It's not nothing, he said, the words hanging between them, heavy with implication. Lila nodded, her lips parting as she searched for a response, but none came. Instead, she reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist, a tentative touch that carried the echo of their closeness. His hand turned, catching hers, and they stood there, linked by that small contact, the air thick with the scent of chlorine and sweat. The age gap loomed, a thread that had fueled their fire, now softening into something unspoken, a bond forged in defiance, fragile, yet real. The door rattled as someone tested the handle outside, a sharp reminder of the cafe beyond, and they broke apart, Ray buttoning his shirt with quick, practiced movements. Lila smoothed her uniform, her hands trembling slightly, the cool tile underfoot grounding her as she met his gaze one last time. He offered a faint smile, a curve of his lips that held no demand, and slipped out, leaving her alone in the steamy confines. She leaned against the sink, the porcelain cool against her palms, and let the moment settle, her pulse still a steady thud in her ears. The next day, the poolside cafe buzzed as usual, the sun beating down on the patio, the chatter of patrons rising over the splash of water. Lila moved through her shift, her tray steady, but her thoughts scattered. The memory of Ray's touch, a quiet hum beneath her skin. He sat at his usual table, sipping iced tea, his posture relaxed, but his eyes tracking her every move. She avoided him at first, pouring coffee for another table, the bitter aroma sharp in her nose, until their paths crossed near the drink station. His fingers grazed her hip as she passed, a fleeting, electric promise that made her pause, her breath catching. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his voice a hushed thread beneath the cafe's noise, and she turned, meeting his steady gaze. A shy smile broke through her hesitation, and she nodded, the gesture small but certain. The urban sprawl stretched beyond the patio, cars rolling, a plane droning overhead, but here their dynamic teetered, a secret carved from a summer afternoon. They didn't define it, didn't retreat, letting the pull between them simmer, a quiet thrill reshaping their roles into something neither had expected. The day wore on, the sun dipping low, casting long shadows across the pool. Lila wiped down a table, the cloth rough against her hand, and glanced at Ray as he left, his silhouette fading into the crowd. The cafe's rhythm carried on. Orders called, ice clinking. But beneath it, their journey lingered, a transformative spark that burned steady, leaving them hungry for the next step, whatever it might be.